Hi, this is Erik Kleinsmith, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Yes, you are. I'm deployed to my backyard in my tent, and it's funny because Erik was my commander in Bosnia. For those who don't know, I'm a counterintelligence agent, and Erik ran a company of counterintelligence agents. We ran around Bosnia and looked for things. And my buddy Brad, who's going to watch us in a little bit, Erik, he brought up Hillary Clinton, and I think these little details, the ground truth I call it, these little details are hilarious. So. I'm on a team. This is for the audience. I'm on a team. We have 2 Humvees. My Humvee has no radio in it. Imagine that. You're deployed with no radio. But we do have a man-portable radio. So we grab it and put it in my Humvee. And it's got an antenna that's, sort of useful because this isn't designed to broadcast 10, 15 miles away. It's meant to be regional. And Hillary Clinton and her daughter, the dopest and the floatist, are going to be in town. And my boss looks at me and says, you're on the detail. You're going to be in the Humvee with the engine running. And if anything happens, you're going to race up towards the first lady, get her in the Humvee and get her to safety. And I'm like, okay, first off, I don't believe my boss, first off, because he's a bit of a dick. 2, I don't have a radio, really. I have a radio, but I really can't talk on it. So I'm sitting there, listening as everybody hops from place to place, following the first lady around. And I'm waiting in this one spot where she's going to land. From a helicopter. And I'm thinking, if anything happens, she's going to get in the helicopter. I'm not going to drive up as fast as I can towards the first lady in my Humvee. Right. And by the way, and my boss was named Bart Dotchko. And I'm thinking, do I believe Bart? Is he telling me the truth? Is this really my job? I've not seen a Frago or Warno. I'm just taking it on faith that this guy's. You don't drive up towards the floatist and the dopest, without these things. Right. And so I'm sitting there, and thank God nothing happened. But I'm on the radio, and I'm thinking, also, I've been taught that you're not supposed to drive and work the radio at the same time. And by the way, my vehicle is a highboy, so it's a 2-seater with a pickup truck back on it. And so if I was to drive up to the first lady, she's going to hop in the front. I have nowhere to go after this. I don't know where a safe location, there's no actual briefing.
Right.
It's just like, it's this ridiculous situation, Erik, where I'm like, they had no trust in my command. I had no idea what to do. And I was like, I hope nothing happens because I'm probably not going to drive up towards the first lady as fast as I can,
If you were driving up and I was Secret Service, I would have shot you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's no way. Anyhow, it was funny to, to have that encounter. And I could see the first lady, I could see her lovely assistant and her daughter and all of that. But it's a funny thing. But we aren't here to talk about Bosnia. We're here to talk about, so we've done a lot of work talking about Afghanistan, why it failed, why it wasn't a surprise for a lot of us that it failed. Yeah. But now that we've left, and I've always said this, like, I don't think we deserve to stay. We didn't take the work seriously. We didn't develop the capacity to actually do the things we wanted to do. I think female empowerment is one of the key things. We think that you can just go and half-ass it, but you can't. That's incredibly hard stuff. So we didn't deserve to stay, but when you leave, there's a cost to leaving. Yeah. And we left a lot of equipment. We left a lot of military capacity in general. And the war on terror isn't over because we're sick of it. There's still going to be jihad against us. And they've openly said, the Taliban has already openly said, come on down to Bagram. Right. We got a training ground.
Right. And I have a game. I'm a big gamer, so I do board games, miniature games, all that stuff. So I got a gaming group. We meet every so often, and one of them is my neighbor, who's a retired Marine Corps officer, and he's done several tours of Afghanistan. His biggest frustration every time he came back was, that we lacked the national will to defeat the enemy. Instead, we got into nation building. That was his opinion. That was, really, if you had to narrow it down to that, is were we there to absolutely defeat the enemy, or were we there to find victory some other way? And I think we're learning the lesson that victory some other way only works when you defeat the enemy. So it is what it is. So the big fear now is a whole retooling of what's next. That's the biggest question mark that's on everyone's mind. And there are ways that, to go about and tackle what's next, but it's going to take a lot of sifting through, quite frankly, political hyperbole, is to just get that out of the way and really focus on what's the issue in terms of the 2 things that we gave our adversaries. One, we gave them a huge moral victory. How is that going to change whether it's the war on terror, but just change the whole infrastructure and the goals and objectives of all the terror groups that are out there around the world, and there's dozens of them. Not only did we give the Taliban a moral victory, but that in essence then fed into the notion that a dedicated group of underground terrorists who are willing to commit their lives and bodies to defeat a superpower can do it. And now it's the second time in the modern era that this is, that they have a great example of them being able to do that. So that's the first thing. The second is just the amount of equipment and the money in that equipment and that incredible increase of capability that we just left behind is just amazing. And that is you can complain about it all you want in terms of dollars and everything else, but the capability, from an analytical standpoint, now look at how does that change the entire face of our adversary with the capability that they have. So those are the two things that if I was, ginning up an intelligence agency, or if I was or getting a new team put together, and they said, look, we need to look at this problem and see what are the areas. Those are the places that I would start, and how that affects these terror groups across the board.
One of the things that we have to realize too about Afghanistan and the Taliban government is well, first off, this job doesn't exist, but one of the most dangerous jobs in the world would be, if it existed, tax collector for Afghanistan, right? You can't reliably walk around village to village in these extremely rugged and rural areas and expect to carry any amount of money with you without getting hijacked by anybody, including fellow Taliban people, right? And the Taliban, you should say Taliban at all, because it depends on where you're at, what part of the country you're in. So their ability to raise money for themselves is limited internally, but is almost limitless externally. The one internal asset they have are these Black Hawks and Chinooks and arms that is in surplus for them.
Right. I mean, I've seen and heard some of the there's some analysts that are downplaying. It's like, well, they can't fly these things. They can't operate this sophisticated equipment. It's like, yeah, but you know what? Somebody can. And we did the equivalent of leaving just pallets of bars of gold sitting in country for that. If they can't use it, they're going to sell it, or they're going to bring in somebody else from another very large country who is not our friends that does have the know-how, and they'll either sell them what's left of the equipment to allow them for their technical intelligence folks to tear it apart, to look at how it's built, to reverse engineer it. All those things can be used for this equipment. And then what they can use, if they can't use it right off the bat, it's going to filter into all their sister and associated organizations. I mean, you can't tell me that the Haqqani network is not filthy rich right now with more money than they've ever seen just handed to them in terms of leftover equipment, arms, ammunition, and other pieces.
Material could definitely be converted into money, and other things. You don't have to. And I agree with a lot of what the analysts say. Two things to clarify too. A lot of this equipment that was captured was really Afghan National Forces equipment.
Right.
So yes, it was made by the U.S. and we brought it over, but it really is their equipment that they lost.
That's true.
And that doesn't, I don't want to get in the political part of the conversation, that doesn't directly go to this administration, but it also has a secondary tie to it. Like this is when people talk about secondary and tertiary effects, this is a secondary effect of pulling out, and I'll say the words haphazardly, recklessly, that this stuff falls into the hands of people that can now use it. It's a resource, right? And so whether they're flying Chinooks or they're simply trading it for other aspects. And by the way, war has been democratized. So you don't need a bunch of Blackhawks to defeat an enemy anymore. And I think we've seen that from our last two major conflicts. Right. So when you're looking as an analyst at this, is there a limit to what's possible with what can be coming at us? And then also, let's not forget that from Afghanistan to say, Prague, not that far at all.
Well, there is a limit, but the limit is defined by how well they're able to take advantage of those two things: the moral victory and this influx capability of cash. And I always teach. I've been training counterterrorism analysis for the Army. I started in 2002 and first, designed the counterterrorism analysis course that the U.S. Army was using for years. And so we train to look at these different terror groups by breaking apart in terms of threat profiling. So the one piece, and it's 8 different categories that you're looking at different groups. And one of the pieces is just what's the effect when you change one part of that and that's the goals and objectives. The goal and objective is no longer to secure Afghanistan for the Islamic State. That goal has essentially has been achieved. But terror groups and any extremist groups, they are not allowed to rest on their laurels and just hang back and say, we won this is great, now let's get into building roads and infrastructure and schools and strip malls and things like that, and we'll build our own community. You're not going to have a terror group anymore. So in order to push forward, there has to be the next step of attacks and goals and objectives that are being set. So it's the first thing that I would look at is like, what's the limitations on what they have with this influx of capability and this, being awash in victory. What's the limitations on what they would do, but really what's the capability now that they now have to reach out, not necessarily to train fighters in Bagram and send them. They only need to send money and assets and reinforcements to, good Lord, Boko Haram, or even through partnership organizations. I would be really concerned if we started seeing Los Zetas in Mexico start using night vision devices and biometrics. It's like, hey, where'd you guys get that from? Well, we have friends who have friends. Once it gets into the black market stream, all this equipment, it goes everywhere. And, that's, again, it's not just Islamic fundamentalist terror groups that are going to benefit from this. It's everybody they're associated with. So it's like not every single organized crime group is a terrorist group, but every single terrorist group is an organized crime or an organized criminal group. And so you're going to have those lead-in. So, I mean, the first thing to look at is how far-reaching would it go? But that's all based upon what's their new goals and objectives. Do they want to secure the world of Islam or Dar es Islam, and get rid of all the apostates from that? They want to try to fulfill that overarching objective, or do they now want to take the fight into what's called Dar al-Harb, or the world of the resistor or the non-believers, which is you and me. That's the next part. That's why Al Qaeda had a huge, I can't even say come to Jesus. That's about the worst analogy you could make. But they had a huge decision point after they defeated the Soviets at the end of the 1980s. Was do they rest on their laurels or do they move forward? Well, parts of that network decided that, hey, we're gonna stop. We're not that fervent to go take the fight into the West. Well, Osama bin Laden was not. And so as he created Al Qaeda, the base, he moved forward and left some of his own elements behind. So he moved to Sudan, started conducting operations, and then in the late 1990s, issued his declaration of war against the U.S., Israel, and the West. And a lot of people it didn't make a lot of news at the time, but as soon as these first attacks started taking place at the Kobar Towers in Kenya and Tanzania embassies and the USS Cole, those were a series of them saying that we're now going to take the attacks against the West. Again, it was a regional problem. It wasn't until 9/11 hit that all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, these guys do have a worldwide reach, and they were able to get in here with very little money, but just a heck of a lot of planning.
Yeah, it's when I think about the counterterror part of what we're trying to do, they basically just opened up a franchise system. Come to Afghanistan or talk to your local person and figure out what you want to do. Again, because war is democratized, right? You don't need this to be an ISIS or a Boko Haram operation. This can literally be, person X operation. Right. And I know that lone wolf attacks, the thought is that they're pretty rare. and they're provisioned by somebody. But at some point, you have enough people that are angry and they have will, and we have no will, and so it's going to be hard to it's going to be hard to stop these folks. If you get someone who's determined and has no future, there's no more scary person. I think O-Dog from Menace to Society said it in the movie. He's like, I'm young, black, and don't give a fuck. There's nothing more terrifying than someone who is completely disenfranchised from their future.
Right. And there's here's a great case study is the Madrid, I guess the Madrid bombings of 2004. And that the organization that committed that, and I can't remember the names off the top of my head. I'm trying to pull it up here, but that group, and they ended up blowing themselves up after, a lot of their key players afterwards as they were being cornered by police. They were not necessarily an Islamic fundamentalist organization, but they had been contracted out by a Islamic fundamental organization. I think it was AQIM, the Maghreb African branch of Al Qaeda. And so, with the proper money and support, you don't even have to have folks who are necessarily agree with your goals and objectives. You just have to provide them the support that they'll, contract them out and have them do their dirty work for you. That's as scary as ever, because now you're, with the appropriate amount of money, which we just left behind, they have now the capability of creating all kinds of new ties, new targets that they now can go after, new organizations that they can then link into. So all these organizations that for years have been under the radar, and the way you described it is perfect, Pete, because that's kind of because of what we did after 9/11. We pounded Al Qaeda so hard that their entire organizational structure had to change, and they had to move into a very desegregated, with a hidden leadership, just issuing very broad-based commands. Where before 9/11, I think even up until the Kenya and Tanzania attacks, Osama bin Laden was a key planner and key decision maker all the way up through those attacks. After 9/11, that was no longer the case. He was essentially hidden and taken out of the fight. Some of the current leadership of Al Qaeda, even though the guy's name escapes me right now, but he's been around forever. He issued a video after the fall of Afghanistan trying to state that, I'm here and we're going to revitalize ourselves and we're going to move forward. Well, this guy is in his 70s at least, and there's no way that he's going to have that pull. So a younger leadership, there's going to be a leadership vacuum that occurs, and it's a leadership vacuum in a terrorist organization is never filled by a moderate leader. It's always filled by somebody who's going to be more extremist in their decision making. So once you add all these pieces up, the entire profile of these organizations are going to change. It's so critical now for us to see that, how does the goals and objectives of this group change now, and how does the individual motivations of folks that want to join that organization, how does that change as well? Because you're going to get some folks who are, the folks who are tired of getting pounded on by drone missile strikes, they're not going to be so keen to fighting as they've gotten older, but the young bloods are going to come in that have not experienced that, and they're going to want to be filled with vim and vigor to go on the offense and start doing their own planning.
And a lot of those young people were infants or adolescents at oldest when that drone flew into their village and killed their uncle. And even if their uncle was a bad guy or wasn't a bad guy, we're so bad at this part of it. We talk, and I always talk about affects over effects. Here's affects over effects. You fly a drone into someone's village and you kill people, and you say 5 people died. We know they were all tied to terrorist networks. But you're not there. You're not there on the ground. You're not there 20 years later and impacting what the emotional impact. So then this kid gets sold a bill of goods like America's come to help improve things. We send him off to school somewhere. And now you've got someone who's just as angry as anything, and rightfully so, at us, because the promise wasn't delivered. And that turns into exploitable people that can be, and they may exploit themselves. This is the thing I really worry about. Someone who's just been thinking about any kind of vengeance, and it doesn't have to be towers falling vengeance. It can be pinpricks, where we just destabilize things. I want to point out some geography here real quick too. Kandahar to Tbilisi, that's in Georgia for everybody listening. That's their Georgia, not our Georgia. Kandahar to Tbilisi, that's Europe, Asia entering into Europe, overland. So you can literally drive a truck.
Yeah.
And that distance is equivalent to, well, it's less than Chicago to San Francisco. It's not even 2,000 miles, more than 15, less than 2. Right. And so you think about that. And then if you're in Tbilisi, you can double that distance again and be in Paris, anywhere in Europe, basically, anywhere. Right. So this stuff is exportable. And one of the reasons why we're in a place like Afghanistan, why we're in all of the stands that we can be, is because we want to draw the attention there as opposed to in Kansas City, right. and right. As much as it's a tragedy to lose 13 people and have over a dozen other service members blown up at Kandahar or at Kabul airport, that is the cost of doing business overseas and preventing that from happening in DC, during the holidays.
Yeah. And the thing is there's, we essentially are on a timer right now, from the fall to, how fast can these groups get organized? But, an attack like the Paris attacks, those only took, a couple of weeks to really do hardcore planning, recon, target selection, weaponization, and then the attack itself. 9/11 took 2 years. Because that was getting the pilots in country, having them trained, then bringing in the muscle very late, all of which had to be Saudis to take over the planes. So that took a long time. Even the Cole bombing was delayed several months because the first target of their attack was the USS Sullivans, but the little dinghy filled with explosives was too overloaded and sank. So they had to reset the entire thing, and it took several months to do that. So we are talking, months for. I honestly would think that you were going to see more local attacks first, especially against the Israelis, against the Saudis, because the Sunni-based groups do not like the Sunni, even though it's a Sunni government. They don't like the Saudis, as Osama bin Laden didn't like the Saudis because they threw him out of country, and that goes all the way back to the first Gulf War. And Osama's trying to tell the House of Saud that you don't need the Americans. I can do it with my Afghan fighters. And the House of Saud is saying, it's a little bit different of trying to eject the Iraqis from Kuwait with about a battalion worth of guys. That's really all you had at the time. So again, there's, so you'll see these more chances of local attacks first within the Middle East, the Africa, and then European region. But again, we are not isolated within the U.S., especially now since we've really kind of thrown away the book on vetting any kind of refugees that are coming in country and spreading them around. We've probably flew or bust in the recon teams for these groups. And if I was a planner on any of these group networks, I would take advantage of the perception that our borders are wide open, and I'd be sending in teams everywhere.
And really, honestly, our borders are wide open. For a couple $1,000, you can buy your way in, and that's just to get to the border and just walk in. Yeah,
I was at a conference out in Deadwood, South Dakota, several weeks ago, and I was talking to a sheriff that was responsible for a county up on the Canadian border. And he told me flat out, he goes, I'm one of 8 sworn badged officers for the entire county. The county is the border with Canada only has about 20% of the border, which is actually monitored. And and I tried. I even tried to I politic within my county to hire another school resource officer, another sheriff's deputy to be the school resource officer. The 2 high schools in the county rejected him because they didn't know what a school resource officer did. So that's the kind of, I'm not talking about, everybody thinks, our borders are wide open. It's not just the southern border. It's all over the place.
Yeah. We have a place called International Falls, Minnesota. Just go 5 miles to the left or right of that and just walk across.
Right.
It's and these are remote areas. I was just down along the border in August in Texas, and every now and then you would see, a Blazer or, like a large SUV. Maybe there was someone in it, maybe not. But even if they were, one dude, granted, he's got a radio, you could kill that dude. And yeah, he gets a call in, and a couple hours from now, maybe someone shows up.
Yeah.
You know, like if you want to, you can go in, you can walk through and use stealth,
Right.
and probably do pretty good most of the time. And you're right, as someone who knows how to do operations, there's not a whole lot stopping you. And that's if you want to go work as hard to get to America. Like you were saying earlier, Spain, all these places are relatively simple to get to. And there's a lot of islands of support along the way where, you know, it doesn't take a whole lot to get from Bagram Airfield. Yeah. And here's my idea. Well, let's get you trained up. Let's get you provisioned. Yeah. Get to this spot, meet to this person, get to that spot, meet that person, and then good luck to you. Right. You're on the way.
Right. You know, that's the thing is, you know, we have to be right 99 times. They only have to be right one time in order to conduct their successful attack. It was right after 9/11. I for work, I went out to Colorado Springs for a very brand new NORTHCOM planning exercise to try to take a look at and write contingency plans for possible terrorist attack. And one of the major scenarios they were talking about is somebody trying to get either a tactical nuclear weapon or some massive amount of armaments or explosives into one of our ports via a ship. And they were talking about Seattle and, well, they could bring it into this port and, how would we counter that? And I finally just, asked, let me ask a question to the entire group here. There's like 60 very senior folks in the room. I said, if I was going to do this, Seattle would be the last place I would go. I would put it in Vancouver because it's because there's the Schengen Treaty that operates in the Pacific like a NAFTA. I could put it on a container in Indonesia, have Jemaah Islamiyah or even them in the Philippines with Abu Sayyaf, have them weaponize the container, put it on a ship, send it up to Vancouver, throw it on a train car, and thanks to the NAFTA, I can then park it in Chicago. And it was a complete blowback. It's like, well, we're not even prepared to plan for that. I said, because that's how I would do it. Yeah. The entire conference, like, yeah, man, it was too tough to come up with that, a branch or a sequel like that for them to plan at the time, because it was like, wait a minute, then they could get in everywhere. It's like, yep, they can. And that, I won't say I was told to sit down, but that was pretty much it for the discussions. Like, that one's too hard. We're not going to touch that one right now.
But this is what we have to understand. Let's go back to the part about screening people that come across. Let's have an open border. Let's be very progressive with that. But let's check everybody that's coming in. Hey, how are you? Who are you? Let's you want to come in, we're gonna do a scan of your iris and get your fingerprints.
Right.
And we're gonna make sure, but we don't even do that. We just release people into the interior. I'm super progressive on immigration. I love it. But we are definitely letting in people that have nefarious intent towards us. I've met people who have very good livings in this country, and they are absolutely anti-American. They want to come here to do business, but they do not like America. They like their home country, but there's no opportunity there. But let's have, and these are not nefarious people. These are just business people that hate America, right? Mm-hmm. And so if they're here, what's left of that? And I don't mean left politically. I mean, like, what's to their people that actually have nefarious intent. And some of these people we're going to snatch up and they're going to learn that having a job and going to Hooters is pretty sweet. And they're going to find out that they do like beer and they do like girls, and they're willing to inculcate. But there's plenty of them that don't.
Yeah, well, that's actually been one of the reasons why the leadership team for the 9/11 hijackers got themselves hardened, is they went and lived in Hamburg, Germany, Mohammed Atta specifically, and the lifestyle of Hamburg. I don't know if you've ever been to the Reaper's Bond, but it's kind of like the Wall in Nuremberg or the red light district in Amsterdam or whatever. But he was so taken aback after living a life in Egypt under some very strict rules. Once he was pulled out of that society, he really became disassociated with his surroundings and really, put aback by how, quote unquote, decadent the West was. So that really hardened him into getting into Islamic fundamentalism while he was a student there. And so there's pluses and minuses with that. Even one of the founding members of the Muslim Brotherhood attended university in Colorado in the 50s and was taken aback that girls could go to dances unescorted or whatever, whatever the society's norm was at the time. That was not what he was used to, and that was his turnoff. That America is just a paper tiger. They're completely decadent on the inside. They may have a strong military, but from a societal standpoint, they have no backbone. So that was his belief moving forward.
The other thing I think it's important to note too, that a successful terrorism operation doesn't have to be the operational success that they planned up. Just the if you were to have a container that you find a bomb on, and we're like, oh my God, we got lucky to catch this one. Yeah. You're talking about a dramatic response to that, and resources, and look, it's just and a complete failure in terms of operationally, but the affect is huge.
Yeah, if you can get as far as that with you've done everything but the boom, and but what that does is that demonstrates capability that we can do everything but including the boom in the future. And so, again, if you're going to grow your organization is going to live, and I talked about this on Sonia's show. Your organization has to make what's called a generational leap. And you have to, which means that your folks that have been in your group, whether it's extremist group, organized crime, or a terrorist group, folks age, and so these groups, even Al Qaeda is, they're 20, we're up on 30 plus years old. They have to now make the leap to the next generation. And if they can't do that, the organization dies from within, not just getting pounded, from the air or from U.S. military strikes or something like that. What we did in Afghanistan probably gave them the generational leap that they needed in order to now turn on an entire generation of new warriors that are coming out of the woodwork as young fighters, emerging to say, these guys were victorious. I'm not going to join a group of losers. I'm going to join a group that's victorious. Once I'm in the group, it better stay victorious or I'm going to splinter off or, quite frankly, go home.
And when groups splinter, boy, they get nasty. They get crazy and they get worse.
Groups never splinter to be more moderate. The splinter is always more extreme.
Do they self-implode, though, more frequently, too, because they are more extreme, or do they gel into something that's even more dangerous and even more resolute?
When a splinter occurs, it's never a massive group of people that simultaneously take a vote and decide to break off. They're always going to follow one leader, and a leader has to be emerged to pull them out. Now, this emergent leader, he really, as he's growing up within the organization, he at a point he makes a choice that if my goals and objectives are not in sync with the goals and objectives of the group that I'm in and I'm emerging into, I'm either going to have to take over this group, or I'm going to have to leave and create my own group. And I think, but leaving and quitting and going back to, being an electrical engineer, that's not going to work. I mean, that's he's not going to join the group for a little bit and then just say, all right, I've had enough of this. I'm going to go back and make some money. So you're going to see two different things. If either there's a, interesting fighting within the group and the group may destroy itself in the process of that, or he splinters off. And when he does, he takes a very hardcore minority of that, of that group with them. That hardcore minority becomes much more dangerous than the original group.
Everybody watching, this is Pete A. Turner from the Break It Down Show, and I've got Erik Kleinsmith with me. He was my commander in Bosnia. He is an expert on intelligence operations and counterterrorism, terrorism, that kind of thing. One of the things that you did, pre 9/11 was you put your finger on the 9/11 terrorists. It doesn't mean you had answered all the questions, but you identified them. You identified a threat. But we weren't capable of getting that, sub office to the next office to the back door, all that information to somewhere where it mattered. Has that changed?
Yes and no. Think of it this way: that one of the things that tripped us was a very tough for our ability. Now, again, we're intel folks working the basement of a intelligence headquarters, but it was really our own operation in support of Special Operations Command. We found by doing, it was the DoD's first really successful data mining operation in its history. The problem is our capability ran afoul of the regulations that we had set up. So when you're doing data mining, your tools are harvesting everything about a particular group and even stuff that has nothing to do with it. So when you're harvesting all that information, you're also pulling in information about U.S. persons. It's inevitable. But the big legal question we ran into was that considered incidental collection, or was that a directed effort because we put in a query and a tool that hauled all that information in? Lawyers at the time couldn't, they shut down the entire operation until they could battle with how to square that. And so we were operating under extremely restrictive measures to, I'll give examples. Like we had a web page that our tool had pulled up. And again, we were tasked with just find Al-Qaeda worldwide. So we did a query, and one of the pages we pulled up was this Michigan militia conspiracy theory site that said that the Al-Qaeda was operating a car dealership in Morocco to funnel money into the organization. And then on the same page, it was another article that they were linked to that said that the FBI was sneaking the KGB and arming them in northern Michigan to create a new Soviet republic in northern Michigan or an Upper Peninsula. And then at the very bottom of the same page was, oh, by the way, Chelsea Clinton's real father is Webster Hubbell, the lawyer from the Whitewater firm. And so when we were trying to work this and we were briefing, what we had found, this footprint, members of another organization, I won't mention any names, but their initials are FBI. First thing they did is when they looked at it, it's like, well, wait a minute, where did you get this intel report? And we showed them that, we had classified information that could verify a lot of the things that we had found. And they said, but where'd you get this one site? So we bring in the page and they see all this garbage on there. It's like, this guy was a nut. And the only answer we could have was like, yeah, he was a nut, but for whatever reason, he was right in this one area. But that taints your entire assessment. It's like, these guys do not know what they're doing. They don't know what they're talking about. They're using half-baked theories as part of their intel assessments. And all we were doing is using them to tip us off to then do more research. But we were really shut down before we could vet a lot of those things and show that. And that was really the part that was upsetting the most, is when we knew we had the cells in New Jersey. We knew we had something was on the way. We had nightly discussions about something is coming. We just need to nail down where what's going on. But since we're looking at stuff within the U.S., we kind of run afoul as like, look, we're really not allowed to look at U.S. persons. I mean, the regulations that are pounded into every intel person every year, mandatory training on what you're allowed and what you're not allowed to do for collecting information that's of stuff going on in the U.S. and U.S. persons. So the whole thing got frozen, and after 90 days, according to the same regulation, it was required to be deleted. So I was the one who had to delete all that information. And I had a warrant officer with me, and it was about the worst day in my military career, because we knew what we were doing. We knew it was so wrong. She was deleting all the hard copies and all the external hard drives that we were using, and I was deleting the main database. And we knew this was going to come back to bite us, that this, you hate to say after attack, it's like, wow, you guys didn't put the pieces together. It's like, no, we did, but we deleted it.
Yeah. Well, okay. And this is part of the problem, right? Like we get better at that. We sacrifice some liberties and some freedom to be able to de-silo some of our intelligence operations. Yeah. We've learned a lot ourselves in the last 20 plus years, but is it more likely or less likely that someone like you is, again, testifying in front of Congress?
You know what? It depends, because, and I go back to like the Patriot Act. That was one thing that opened a big door to allow intelligence to share information with law enforcement. It did not open any doors to allow law enforcement to share information back with intelligence folks. That was never really built in there. So even though it's your law enforcement, it is your FBI, it's your local police that can make the arrest to take action against folks within the U.S. If they do come up with something that's, their own analysts may find something overseas that's going on, they can't share with other intel analysts. That's a big problem. The other piece, though, is like you have to have, right after 9/11, there was a tons of money that we threw at. We're going to build these data mining centers all over the place. And all we need to do is get all these tools and all these data sources and throw them into a room, throw some analysts in there, and then we have ourselves a data center. And what they found immediately was that wasn't working. And it was because you need, and that's the entire subject of what my book on intelligence operation is couched behind, is you can't, it's not just data and tools, those are important, but unless you have the right people that are trained the right way, and you then build the right processes for them to do the work, the data and the tools aren't going to mean anything.
One of the things that we struggle with in the intelligence community is there's always a threat coming. That is our default. And so everything is a threat. It's always coming. And I called it like the threat monkey in the Al-Fa Palace in Iraq would spin the wheel, be like, it's a V-bid today. You know, like, it's the suicide bomber. And then every 50 days or so, there would be an attack. There would be something that would happen. And so you knew that there was always a threat, but everybody thinks they've got their finger on stuff. I've seen, and God bless analysts, right? You know, we got to have analysts. You guys all do an awesome job at that, but I've seen the analysts so in love with their work, they become salespeople, and they try to convince the command of something that's going on. Yeah.
You get emotionally attached to some of the things that you've worked on. So it's, you know, hey, what are you doing with that chart? I grew it from a single node. That's mine. You know, I want to take credit for it. And you're going to get personality, pieces of that. I mean, I had some great analysts when I was working at my last job as chief of intel for land information warfare activity. But I honestly got it. There's one guy that I had, he was great. All I needed to do was point him in a certain direction, and he was like one of the seven dwarves going in and mining and getting that stuff out. The problem is he would pull out so much stuff that was so superfluous and worthless. It's like, that is fantastic. And I had another analyst that's just the same way, just fantastic person at finding data, just knew how to surf the systems and pull that in. But God bless her if every other day we weren't back in China by the end of the day. So it takes part of that is the discipline of, there's no understanding. There's no such thing as a peace dividend for the intel folks. You can't just say we're going to deactivate. The Cold War is over. We can lower our guard and not have to worry about this kind of thing. We obviously know that wasn't true. But at the same time, we have to prioritize what we think our best sources of targets are going to be, and that's why the threat profiling piece that I've taught and I put that in as a major piece of the book. There's no way to understand an organization unless you can really break it down and build a profile of that threat. Same way that the FBI behavioral scientists do with serial murderers. They're profiling a single individual, and I built this. Came up and refined a system that we started working with in the Army. And it was working with a lot of civilians who came up with a couple of different versions of it. But it was never really incorporated into a purely, this needs to be a doctrinal way of how we look at organizations and break them apart according to, their demographics, the targets they go after, their methods of operation. Each of those things says a lot about that organization.
We just beat up a little bit on analysts. I want to make sure we're fair. Let's beat up on my peers in the counterintelligence field because we're crap at this thing too. So here's a great story right here. I put the link up for it. If you just go to my YouTube page, type in Pete Turner, type in John Green and counterintelligence, and you'll probably get it. Anyhow, the basic story is this, and I have my own version of the same story. We're in Afghanistan. It's a counterinsurgency environment, and the CI people are recommending and terminating all of the locals from the camp. Why? Because they've made false statements on their hiring documents. Because someone took an American base created hiring packet and transported that to Afghanistan. And so it's like, license number, please. And there are no licenses, at least this time, no licenses in Afghanistan. And so some enterprising Afghans like, I'll give you a license, And so the CI people, instead of going, here's our opportunity to create double and possibly even triple agents, who knows, right? Do our job of getting close to the most evil people around. They were terminating people that needed jobs and needed money and just screwing this up. So the people in the field, the human people, never get to I'm speaking this from direct experience. The people who do human don't ever get to season into the job in a way that makes sense. You have, let's say 24 months of actual field time before you never see the field again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can't run an organization like that. And the same thing is true in the other counterintelligence disciplines too. You want to go and you want to get the sweet gig working in Kuala Lumpur, teaching people how to place bugs or something. No one wants to go sit in a crappy wooden box hooch and live out of a backpack, right? So our capacity to do this stuff, it's severely limited, even though we all think we have a ton of experience.
Yeah. From my experience, the military goes back and forth between technology and human-based intelligence all the time. So when I first developed the counterterrorism analysis course, it was 2005. After I'd gone to the DIA, and I had a contact there that was the course manager for their counterterrorism analysis course. And I said, look, we need to get a bunch of analysts in. He goes, all right, I can give you 18 months from now, I can give you one course and you got to share it with the Bureau. How many students do you want to fit in there? I was like, I think it was at the time, I was like, I think I have 18,000 students I need to fit in there because we were training all of them in the Army. He said, look, I can't help you. So we developed that course, and then another course called Critical Thinking. Those two courses, we had anytime a 6-month to an 18-month waiting list for units that have asked our instructors, please come out and train us on this. And it wasn't just purely counterterrorism analysis. I mean, we were teaching that threat profiling, but you can use it for everything from white collar crime to gangs. So it was great fundamental pieces that everybody was using. Well, those two courses went away in favor of DSIGS training, which is a software tool used by the Army for intelligence analysts. So it turned into, we don't need this thinking stuff. We need to teach these guys. I actually had a lieutenant colonel tell me from one of the organizations we supported. He goes, I don't want to teach these guys all the analytical stuff. Just teach them the tools and plug them into the machine. And that's all he cared about, so that he could get his daily reports or whatever. It's just, and I flatly refused. While both those courses eventually were canceled in favor of technical tool training. And so that the entire effort, we were no longer training analysts how to do analysis. We were just training them how to make sure the tool functions.
Yeah, I received all kinds of training on the latest and greatest technology, which was already obsolete.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you don't need to train me to do this stuff. You
Right.
hire some other guy, pay him $80,000, have him sit in front of a computer all day.
Right.
You need to put me on a plane and put me in different countries so I can learn how to culturally adapt wherever I go. So much more valuable, because look, when you go to work, and this is me talking to the audience, if you go to work in, say, Saudi Arabia as a U.S. person in the intelligence community, you're not going to have access to the hardened, deadly people that you need access to prevent potential attack. It's just, you're not there long enough. You're not staying there for a whole career, and that's what's required of it.
Right.
And so when something does happen, you're probably useless in this whole fight. I mean, we have to have these people, but they're not trained well enough. They barely have access to the people that have access. And it's a losing battle. So when I'm hard on the intel people and the analysts and all that kind of stuff, I'm super hard on my peers on the human side, because we just struggle to get this right. We're focused on stupid machines and cameras and stuff. By the way, anybody can get camera footage of anything now. Anything. So the one thing where we have a chance is to have a human recce team going out and doing reconnaissance. A lot of that is going to be obsolete, because you can simply fly a drone. You can go strong arm a local business or whatever, and you can get all the footage you need and never have to expose yourself openly to the target you're looking at.
Yeah, I remember in the Balkans, I think we had a camera that we could put the camera lens into the button of a first aid pouch, and so as there was a demonstration going on in the local town or whatever, we could have somebody walking around with this LB harness on, getting shots of folks. That was considered state of the art. Now it's just like, there's probably 30 people there with phones. It's, everybody's going to be taking pictures. We just got to talk to one of them. Right. And that's, I guess we as Americans are always going to have this dilemma of having to, and I wrote this at some point, the intelligence community and the intelligence as a business fell in love with technology, but in the process, we left the human footprint behind. And so there's more and more reliance on overhead imagery, air breathing, which is airplanes, or non-air breathing, which is satellites. We say, we got this over the horizon capability. We don't need guys on the ground anymore. And there's time and time again, there's examples of where that has failed. Yeah, to the point where even I think it was even after 9/11, we found that we had virtually no human assets anywhere in the entire region, and yet that was our focal point. So who are we going to rely upon? Well, we got to find somebody that's a Western ally that we can rely upon, that they've actually had agents in country the whole time. So it's tough. We, besides pulling out of Afghanistan from a military standpoint, we've lost a lot of eyes and ears on everything that's going on there. And now, by the way, like you said, and I've read the same stories, that Bagram has been opened up as a Walmart training center for, any extremist group that wants to come in, and they're doing that without fear of any reprisals right now, because the last thing that anybody in the West wants to do is have to try to go back in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of filtering that I got, a lot of things that I want to say that I'm not going to say.
Yeah, I know.
But so the Bagram thing, right, and the immigration thing. People can downplay that threat, but they don't have any idea what they're talking about. Why wouldn't Bagram become this training ground? Why would it be used for anything other than nefarious intent when they say they're going to use it for something evil? And maybe it's all bananas, and that's not really going to happen. But why would terrorism stop today? Why would we think it would be any different?
Well, the problem is it's like I said, for these organizations to stay as organizations, it's imperative. It's not like it's something that is just a great thing to do. They have to do it for their own self-preservation. You stop doing your jihad, your organization falls apart. The goals and objectives of that group requires it. And it also requires, in order to keep the recruitment funds and the money to come in, just like any business, think of it as a business. Business has to make money. Their business is in the money of victory, recruits, the logistics and sustainment. If you're not providing the product that is needed to continue the jihad, to conquer the world in the name of Islam, then your entire business operation needs to fold up. And so it's not like we're waiting on them to get motivated to move forward. They are already motivated because they are required to conduct these attacks by their own ideology. So ideology becomes incredibly important. The individual motivations, the changing goals and objectives of each of these groups, now that Afghanistan has changed, all the goals and objectives of all these groups will change. So we now have to start picking those out to understand, how are these going to change? Who are the next targets? And then who's going to be going after that?
What do we do about all this? What do we do, Erik? This sounds so horrible.
Yeah, it does. And I'm sorry. I wish I came on and discussed a much better topic, which what the topic is that I cannot talk about because we haven't finished that. But
we'll get there. We'll get there on that.
It's cold case stuff is fun to do, but man, you can't. It's tough not to talk about it. But my big thing is if I was in charge of a group of analysts, I would have them almost clear the boards of everything that they're working on. Like, look, we need to start fresh with this problem set and just get a fresh pair of eyes that says, where do we go? Where are they going from here? We need to do a complete reassessment of every single organization that we now see has benefited from either the arms or the moral victory. Follow those two catalysts. The moral victory is a little bit harder to follow, but it is not hard to follow the money. And you'll start looking for indicators of where this windfall of weapons and equipment. Start tracking where that is flowing around the world. That will tell you where the next fight is going to be, because it's not going to go to somebody who's going to sit back and do nothing. Weapons and equipment are only going to go to people who are ready to weaponize their operation and start conducting the next attack.
That's the analyst side of it. Let's say that Congress comes to you and says, hey, you were the guy last time. We want to make sure you're the guy this time, and we're going to listen to you. You can build a team. So you get some analysts, right? What else do you need? Do you need some human guys? Do you need some operational planners? Or what do you need?
Analysts analysts don't do anything. For intel folks, the most important person is whoever is the decision maker they're supporting. And I hate to say it, you and I both seen it, where the self-licking ice cream cone, where analysts do analysis just for the sake of doing analysis, and they're not supporting anybody. So unless you're doing analysis for a customer, somebody who can actually act on what you're doing, the products that you came up with, it doesn't matter what you're doing.
Yeah.
You're just putting together some, hey, we told you so, arguments after the next attack occurs, like, oh yeah, we were tracking with all these guys. Well, who'd you talk to? Well, nobody.
Yeah. It's the age-old problem, I was great at collecting. I was fantastic at it. And pretty much the last paper I wrote said, hey, Americans in Zabul, do not deliver books directly to kids. This isn't me saying it. It's the Afghans saying it. Do not deliver books to kids. Yeah. And a year later, what does the State Department do? They get themselves blown up delivering books to kids. Right. So I wrote a report. All kinds of people read it. Yeah. And nobody acted on it a year later because we have this institutional amnesia.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's there's so many things that are frustrating once you get into the massive organizational, all the disputes, all the parochial interests, all the empire building. That's just natural. That goes on any big organization or network of organizations. I won't mention the headquarters I was working in at the time, but there was one building I would go into, and I found out that they had the director of the organization had to get a briefing on what was going on in the war on terror every day. And so it was an 1.5-hour briefing that had to be put together every day by several analysts. And then they had an 1.5-hour rehearsal with all the analysts to make sure that the director saw a perfect briefing of what was going on. And it came to somewhere, I don't know, the man hours spent of work just to brief somebody on, you know what, why don't you just pick up the early bird and read it like everybody else does? But again, the amount of wasted time that was briefed to, now again, I'm sure the director was incredibly informed every day, but the amount of effort that was put in just for that one piece was such a waste of time.
I think we've had this conversation before too, because I love to do the math on that. Like, this is a $10 million practice for the practice, literally double practicing for a meeting. And a lot of it's just not pro forma, but the electronics warfare officer is going to say the same thing they basically say every meeting. Yeah. And they're sitting there,
Yeah. I can't tell you how many rehearsals to the pre-meeting for the pre-meeting rehearsal that I've had to sit through over the years. That's it's just like, this is why I carry a Dell and a penny crossword puzzle book with me, because I'm sitting in the back hearing the same thing for the umpteenth time while somebody's changing a slide from happy to glad, kitty to cat.
Yeah. It's so bad. And it's so true. Like, one of the things too is, you come in and you go through this briefing and you had to go like show your boss the briefing, and then he's got to show his boss, and then there's updates and there's changes and blah, 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 on and on and on and on. Right. And then you get in there and you do it and you do the briefing and not a goddamn thing changes, like nothing. Why did we do this briefing? Why did we? Yeah. Well, it's crazy.
People complain about, PowerPoint range, being a PowerPoint range or something like that. But what I've learned is the folks who demand PowerPoint, what they're doing is instead of just getting an oral brief and them taking notes, you're actually creating their notes for them. And so they, again, so what you're doing is, and this is not just in DOD or Intel. I mean, I've been in business where it's, why am I cranking out so many slides for my boss? And it's just like, you know what? Because the guy never takes notes when he listens to me. So when he goes forward, the only way he can tell his boss what's going on is to crank back through my slides and to pull those notes out. Yeah. That's what I'm doing. And so unfortunately, that's where PowerPoint becomes a crutch, not just for the presenter, but also for the person receiving it.
Those PowerPoint slides too, if you're willing to do the work, are also a legacy, while deployed, right? And one of my tricks I would do is we would talk about program F, and I would say, hey, great, let's do it. Here are the last 5 units that did program F. Yeah. What are we going to do different?
Right.
And because it was all like we have this idea, this institutional amnesia. And these were part of the reasons why we had to leave Afghanistan, is we never got over this institutional incapacity to remember who we were from year to year and what we had done.
That goes back to, my friend that I was talking about National Will, after his second or third tour there, he came back, he goes, God, I'm tracking the same guys that I was tracking the first time recommended we pick this guy up, and we didn't have the national will to go get this guy. And it was, you don't have to prove it in warfare. You don't have to prove it in a court of law whether somebody is bad or not. But in a legal sense, you got to start putting together a whole legal case of whether this guy's bad. Now I have to prove it in a court of law before we're even allowed to go pick this guy up. That's one of the issues that that he's that was very frustrating for him to go back there and do that. So when I told him I was writing a book on intel, he just was adamant. He goes, "You got to talk about national will and national will." I was like, "That's not what the book is about." But thanks, that's
it's so true. Okay, so one more real quick topic: Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. People are begging for him to go to court and have his day in court. But there's a reason why he hasn't done that, because it's not really a simple process. And if you take him to court, there's a chance.
Yeah,
it's greater than zero that he walks.
Which court? Is it a military tribunal or is it a civilian court? That was the debate in 2008, early in the Obama years, I think, because they were talking about moving him back to, whatever court it was. The joke at the time with the guys that I was working with, it's like, you don't take him to court. You take him to the World Trade Center, let everybody know ahead of time, and then just drop them off.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, no, I'm not being facetious, but that's a troubled piece. And there's precedent of going back to the Geneva Convention, even though they're not signatories to it. It's like, look, it's hard to grant somebody the rights of somebody according to the Geneva Convention when specifically in there, if you're not wearing a uniform, you're not considered a legal combatant. So, there's all kinds of things that's muddying the waters on that. So
well, and also the thought that we were going to close Gitmo and then put these guys at Leavenworth or whatever, or and all the other prisons are like, no, like, one, illegal, two, you paying for this, three, we don't want them.
Right.
It's ways are said than done. Well, listen, terrorism is terrifying, and that's why it's in the title of it. And I appreciate you talking about this, because we think that this is just a stupid political thing and we got a bunch of trapped Afghans. Like, this is an enormous problem. And from my point of view, we have not improved the situation that was already screwed up. We just have a different, horribly screwed up situation that we have a crappy ability to provision answers to.
Well, and think about all the second guessing and gnashing of teeth and why didn't we do this and why didn't we do that after 9/11? My perspective is, let's do that now before the next one occurs.
Yeah.
Whether it's I mean, I don't want to get into the political piece of it, but that can take place all the way down into a metropolitan police department. Start looking at these threats coming in now, because they're coming. Even in the commercial environment. Folks that are relying upon tourism as a major industry, folks are relying upon our infrastructure being in place, the airlines and everything else, all the businesses that suffered, even the restaurant businesses that suffered after 9/11, and it was like, God, if we'd only known, if we could only have stopped them beforehand, it's like, we did know, and we missed, and we couldn't stop them. I was just, I said this on my own social media. I carry that sense of guilt with me every day. The 20th anniversary of 9/11 was this last one was incredibly hard on me, and I can't explain why, other than I'm worried now that we're not looking at this from a post 9/11 viewpoint again. We're back to a pre 9/11 mentality where the only people fighting this conflict is military, law enforcement, and some first responders and some security folks. Everybody else is, now worried about which bathrooms they're supposed to be using or things like that.
Well, yeah. It's hard to solve really complex problems like this when you tie both arms behind your back and get in fights as to what your pronouns are. And I'm not denigrating anybody's message.
None of it, but there are things that are insurmountably more important, and we need to start looking at that now.
Right.
The fight is no longer in Afghanistan. Well, if it's no longer there, where is it going to be? Everywhere else, including
Right. Yeah, and nobody knows where the Bosphorus is or Straits of Malacca are, but until you lose access to them, then all of a sudden they'll be desperately important. And that's just two things off the top of my head that matter that we don't seem to ever care about. Yeah. Well, listen, I appreciate it. This is an awesome hour. We provided a lot of insight, I think, into a very complex and thorny problem, and I always appreciate talking with you.
Yep. Oh, thanks so much. And that's. again, it's a lot of what we talk about. I'm pulling stuff directly out of the book I wrote, even though it's an academic book, so that the price tag is up at the academic level. But it's a very readable book, from front to finish. And the good thing is I know it's been picked up by several schools. From folks are reading it in Mexico, in Australia, in Belgium, in Greece, and in the U.S. So I'm happy that folks are looking at this, because that gives a lot of, all the things I talk about, the data, the tools, the people, the processes, the threat profiling aspect, that's all in there. And so if you need a one-stop resource to building or improving your intel capability, take a look at it, because that will help you immensely. And
that link is right there on the bottom of the screen for that book, and it's called Intelligence Operations. Okay. I have it, and it's excellent. I mean, it
besides Amazon, I would go directly to my publisher, Cognella. Cognella.com, because it's available there.
Yeah. Or buy it used from somebody, whatever. But if you're serious about learning about Intel, the $100 is nothing, because the book is chock full of stuff that you're going to need. All right. Let me sign us off here. Stand by.
Sure. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much for watching.